At some point you have had the thought, maybe it was a Tuesday afternoon in a meeting that had no reason to exist. Maybe it was a Sunday night with that familiar heaviness settling in, knowing what tomorrow looks like. Maybe it was the moment you did the math and realized that after taxes, commuting, work clothes, lunches and the cost of your time, your job is paying you significantly less than the number on your contract suggests. The thought is always some version of the same thing. What if I just stopped doing this? And the fantasy that follows is vivid and specific. Freedom, time, the ability to work on something that actually means something to you. No alarm, no commute, no performance reviews, no ceiling on what you can earn placed there by someone else's budget decisions. Just you, your skills, and the open possibility of what you could build if the job was no longer consuming the best hours of every day. That fantasy is not wrong. The freedom is real. People build it every single day. But between where most people are and where that fantasy lives, there is a stretch of financial and psychological reality that almost nobody talks about honestly. And the people who walk into it without understanding it are the ones who end up crawling back to employment worse off than when they left, not because they were not capable, but because they were not prepared. This video is that honest conversation, not to talk you out of leaving, but to make sure that when you go with your eyes open and your foundation solid enough to actually make it work. The first thing nobody tells you is what quitting actually costs before you earn a single dollar from whatever you are building. Most people calculate their runway by looking at their savings and dividing by their monthly expenses. If I have $10,000 saved and I spend $2,000 a month, I have 5 months. Simple enough. Except that calculation almost always underestimates what leaving a job actually does to your financial picture. When you are employed, your employer is covering costs you never see directly. Health insurance contributions, payroll tax, retirement matching in some cases, paid leave, sick days. The moment you leave, all of those invisible benefits become visible expenses that you are now responsible for entirely. Someone who calculates their runway based on their take-home pay without factoring in what employment was silently providing is going to run out of money faster than they planned every single time. The honest calculation looks different. Take your monthly essential expenses. Add the full cost of health insurance as a self-employed individual. Add a buffer for taxes on your new income, because as a self-employed earner, you will owe more than you did as an employee. Add an emergency buffer on top of your runway, because when you are building something new, things always take longer and cost more than the plan suggested. Now look at your savings against that number. That is your real runway. For most people, that number is significantly shorter than the fantasy version. And knowing that before you quit is not discouraging. It is the information that tells you exactly what to build before you make the jump, so that when you do, you are not racing against a clock that is already running. The second thing nobody talks about honestly is the psychological reality of the first few months after quitting. The first week feels incredible. The alarm does not go off. Nobody needs anything from you. The possibilities feel endless, and the relief of not being somewhere you did not want to be is genuinely euphoric. Most people who have quit describe that first week as one of the best feelings of their life. And then the second week starts, and the structure that the job provided, the thing you hated about it, is suddenly gone. There is no external force organizing your time, no deadline someone else set, no meeting pulling you into focus. Just you and an open day, and the slow, creeping realization that motivation without structure is extraordinarily hard to sustain. This is where a significant number of people who quit begin to struggle. Not because they are lazy, because the human brain is not naturally wired for unstructured self-direction over long periods of time. The job, for all its limitations, was providing an external scaffolding that kept the day organized. Without it, days blur into each other. Productivity becomes inconsistent, and the anxiety of watching savings decrease without a predictable income replacing it creates a psychological pressure that makes clear thinking very difficult. The people who navigate this successfully are the ones who build their own structure before they quit. A schedule they hold themselves to. Clear daily and weekly goals that function as the external accountability the job used to provide. A workspace that is separate from their relaxation space, Rituals that signal to the brain that the working part of the day has started. These things sound small. They are not small. They are the difference between the freedom feeling lasting and the freedom feeling becoming a source of anxiety within 60 days. The third reality is about income, and specifically about how long it actually takes for new income to replace what the job was providing. There is a version of the quit your job story that circulates constantly online. Someone leaves their job, builds something, and within 90 days they are earning more than they ever did in employment. Those stories exist. They are real. They are also not representative of what most people experience, and building your plan around the exceptional outcome rather than the realistic one is one of the most common and most costly mistakes people make. For most people building online income, freelancing, or starting a service business, the realistic timeline to consistent income that covers essential expenses is somewhere between 6 months and 18 months. Not because the path does not work, because building something from scratch takes time, regardless of how hard you work or how good you are. Clients need to be found. Trust needs to be built. Skills need to be refined. Platforms need to be learned. All of that takes longer than the highlight reel version suggests. This does not mean you should never quit. It means you should ideally have income already moving before you do. Even a small amount of proven online income, 1 or 2 clients, a product that has already made sales, an affiliate commission that has already hit your account, changes everything about the psychological and financial pressure of the transition. It is the difference between building something you have already proven works and starting from complete zero while your savings count down. The smartest version of this transition is not a dramatic leap. It is a deliberate bridge. You build the new thing while the job is still paying for your life. You validate that the income is real before you remove the safety net. And you quit when the new income is already covering a meaningful portion of your expenses, not when you have finally gotten tired enough of the job to stop showing up. The fourth thing worth understanding is what happens to your identity when the job is gone. This one surprises almost everyone because it is not something people think about before they leave. But your job, regardless of how much you dislike it, is part of how you understand yourself and how others understand you. When someone asks what you do, you have an answer. When you are in a social situation and the conversation turns to work, you have a place in it. The job provides a social identity that is so embedded, most people do not notice it until it is gone. The transition period between leaving employment and having something new to point to can feel genuinely disorienting. People describe it as a loss of direction even when they are actively working towards something. The work they are doing does not feel legitimate yet because it has not been validated by consistent income or external recognition. And that feeling of illegitimacy can quietly undermine confidence at exactly the moment when confidence is most needed. Understanding this in advance does not prevent it from happening, but it means you can recognize it for what it is when it shows up, a temporary psychological adjustment, rather than evidence that you made a mistake. The people who build successful businesses after leaving employment almost universally describe a period of doubt and disorientation in the early months. The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who do not is almost never capability. It is the willingness to keep going through that period without letting the feeling become the decision. Here is what the picture looks like when it goes right. And it is worth being specific about this because the path is real, even if it is harder than the highlight reel version suggests. The person who does this successfully spends 6 to 12 months before quitting building the foundation. They create an emergency fund that covers 6 months of real expenses, including the hidden costs of self-employment. They start building their income stream on the side and validate that real people will actually pay for what they are offering. They get their first clients or their first sales before they need them, not after. They build a daily structure and test whether they can maintain it without external accountability. And they set a specific income threshold, a number their new income needs to hit consistently before they make the jump. And they honor that threshold even when the impatience to leave becomes almost unbearable. That person does not quit dramatically. They transition deliberately. And because the foundation is solid when they go, the first year looks completely different from the person who quit on emotion and figured it out under pressure. The drama is less. The freedom is more. And the business they build has a real chance of becoming the thing the fantasy promised, because it was not built on desperation. Here is what I want you to carry after this video ends. Quitting your job is not the goal. Freedom is the goal. And freedom is not created by the act of leaving. It is created by what you build before, during, and after. The leaving is just the moment when the preparation either holds or it does not. Most people who fail at this do not fail because they were not talented enough or did not work hard enough. They fail because they went too early, with too little runway, no proven income, and no honest understanding of what the transition was actually going to cost them financially and psychologically. You now have that understanding, which means if you choose to make this move, you can make it the right way. Not someday when you feel ready, because that feeling never arrives on its own, but on a specific date that you set after specific conditions have been met. Build the foundation first. Validate the income first. Then jump. That order is everything.